Catch fame young, wrote Eileen Chang, one of China's most trenchant literary icons. The oft-quoted maxim first appeared in the 1944 preface to her breakthrough short story collection, Romances.
If you want to make a name for yourself, do it young. If it comes too late, the thrill just isn't the same.
Chang was the poster child for her own philosophy. In her early 20s, she took the Shanghai literary scene by storm with her sharp, cinematic prose, publishing iconic essays like On Dressing and its English counterpart, Chinese Life and Fashions, in the monthly journal The 20th Century. For Chang, capitalizing on early success wasn't just about vanity. It was a pragmatic embrace of youth's fleeting premium. At the intersection of psychology and economics lies the foundational theory of intertemporal choice, more popularly understood through the lens of delayed gratification. The bedrock of this theory is the canonical Stanford Marshmallow experiment, pioneered in the late 1960s and early 1970s by the American psychologist Walter Mischel. Mischel's experimental design was elegantly simple. Preschool children aged 4 to 6 were placed individually in a room with a single marshmallow. Subjects were informed that the researcher had to step out, leaving them with two distinct strategies: consume the treat immediately or exercise self-control for 15 to 20 minutes until the researcher returned, which would yield a premium reward of a second marshmallow. The outcomes of this landmark longitudinal study across subsequent decades demonstrated a striking correlation. Children capable of sustained restraint and higher delayed gratification exhibited significantly superior scholastic performance, marked by higher SAT scores, alongside lower obesity rates and enhanced psychological resilience under stress during adolescence. To economists, this remains the definitive empirical evidence that an individual's low temporal discount rate in early childhood serves as a powerful predictor of future human capital compounding. Yet long before 20th century psychology weighed in, economists had already laid the intellectual groundwork. In 1834, the Scottish-Canadian political economist, physician, and educator John Ray formulated the bedrock of intertemporal choice and time preference in his seminal treatise, Statement of Some New Principles on the Subject of Political Economy. Investigating why individuals forego present consumption in favor of future investment, Ray introduced the concept of the effective desire of accumulation, making him arguably the earliest documented theorist of what we now call delayed gratification. Modern replication studies, however, have punctured the moralizing myth of the marshmallow. Accumulating evidence reveals that children who devour the treat immediately are rarely suffering from a deficit of cognitive self-control. Rather, they are making a calculated response to systemic socioeconomic instability. For a child reared in poverty, a promised future reward carries prohibitive counterparty risk. Skeptical of whether an institutional authority figure will honor the pledge or confiscate the asset, the child realizes that immediate consumption is not an impulse control failure, but the most economically rational decision. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Whether delayed gratification is a triumph of individual willpower or merely a structural byproduct of one's socioeconomic environment remains an open, deeply polarizing debate. But if we expand this micro-level behavioral calculus to a macroeconomic scale, a more ominous question emerges. What happens when an entire society loses its collective appetite for future investment? When time preferences skew chronically toward the immediate present, the resulting capital strike invariably plunges the economy into a state of secular stagnation. In the following section, we will dissect the systemic mechanics of this investment paralysis and evaluate the macroeconomic prescriptions required to jumpstart capital formation. For Eileen Chang, capturing early fame to secure early indulgence was the template for a charmed life. For Richard C. Koo, a comparable privilege was practically a birthright. As the eldest son of Koo Kwang Ming and a scion of the Lu Kang Koo clan, one of Taiwan's 5 historical oligarchic families, Koo enjoyed an aristocratic pedigree that virtually guaranteed institutional leverage. Born in Kobe, but educated extensively in the United States, Koo's identity transcended simplistic national boundaries. Despite his deeply rooted American professional background, his allegiance became firmly embedded in Japan, where he has anchored his career at the Nomura Research Institute since 1984 as a chief economist advising state leadership. Around 1997, amid the wreckage of Japan's asset bubble, Koo formulated his signature economic doctrine, the Balance Sheet Recession. This paradigm has become the definitive framework for explaining not only Japan's subsequent decades of stagnation, but also the 2008 global financial crisis. The mechanics of his theory are elegantly bleak. When a catastrophic asset bubble bursts, the collapse of real estate and equity markets destroys private sector wealth overnight. Crucially, however, while household and corporate assets evaporate, their liabilities, their debts, remain fixed at face value. Under this structural trauma, a profound psychological and economic inversion occurs. Even if the central bank slashes interest rates to zero, the private sector refuses to borrow or invest. When an entire society pivots from profit maximization to debt minimization, aggregate demand collapses into a black hole, trapping the economy in an intractable long-term paralysis. Stripped of its academic veneer, the doctrine merely describes the stagflation phenomenon caused by economic deflation through the lens of the relationship between lending and investment. Yet in the marketplace of economic ideas, fame demands a highbrow, obfuscating nomenclature. Hence, the Balance Sheet Recession was born. Through his tireless proselytizing, and aided by long-standing tradition in academia, that honored tradition of prioritizing pedigree and position over pure academic merit, Koo successfully carved out a lucrative niche for his paradigm. A case in point was a recent high-profile symposium hosted by the Peterson Institute for International Economics, debating whether China has entered a balance sheet recession. Koo himself aggressively took the stage, vigorously hawking his intellectual merchandise as the definitive panacea for Beijing's policymakers. The core prescription of his aggressively marketed formula is as straightforward as it is expensive. When a balance sheet recession strikes, the state is weaponized as the economy's sole providential savior. The sovereign must step into the breach as the borrower of last resort, unleashing aggressive fiscal stimuli to single-handedly plug the spending vacuum left by a retreating private sector. The bolder the presumption, the bountiful the yield. This age-old delusion of forcing material reality to bend to sheer willpower finds its modern sanctuary in macroeconomics. The fatal flaw of economics is its inherent inability to construct a closed system, akin to Newtonian physics, where independent variables can be isolated and rigorously stress-tested. Consequently, the discipline has degenerated into a playground for pseudo-scientific charlatans, a battleground where rhetorical bombast trumps empirical discipline. It is precisely within this vacuum of unfalsifiability that intellectually bankrupt doctrines like Richard Koo's can run amok, masquerading as profound heresy. Yet a rudimentary grasp of microeconomic axioms demolishes his entire edifice. Any capital investment is fundamentally driven by the expectation of marginal returns. The children who abstained from the immediate marshmallow did so out of institutional trust in a twofold yield 20 minutes later. Entrepreneurs who deploy capital today do so out of a conviction that tomorrow will bring a higher net present value. Therefore, a private sector's refusal to borrow, or its frantic rush to deleverage, is not a sudden behavioral pathology of debt minimization. It is a cold, rational assessment that the future offers zero profitable projects. It is not a loss of the ability to borrow. It is a total capitulation of confidence in tomorrow. In the 1970s, Robert Emerson Lucas Jr. unleashed an intellectual earthquake that permanently reconfigured the terrain of modern macroeconomics, the rational expectations revolution. For this pioneering work, which culminated in the formulated doctrine known as the Lucas Critique, he was awarded the 1995 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. The core axiom of rational expectations is that market participants are neither blind nor naive. Rather, they are sophisticated optimizing agents. When formulating economic decisions, individuals do not merely extrapolate mechanically from past trends. Instead, they actively synthesize all available forward-looking information, ranging from fiscal trajectories and central bank maneuvers to shifts in the geopolitical landscape, to construct highly rational forecasts of the future. While individual predictions are susceptible to random short-term shocks, the collective market trajectory over the long run remains free from systemic errors. In the lexicon of econometrics, the public's subjective expectations are, on average, statistically unbiased. A rigorous dissection of Richard Cou's Balance Sheet Recession reveals it to be little more than a semantic sleight of hand, a superficial rebranding of the 20th century ghost of stagflation. Yet, while Robert Lucas elegantly unmasked the underlying causality of such economic paralysis decades prior, Cou presents an astonishing academic regression. It remains a profound paradox how a scholar arriving well after the new classical revolution could demote an elegant causal framework into a mere phenomenological bookkeeping exercise, flattening a profound diagnostic theory into a superficial summary of corporate balance sheets. Cou's stubborn refusal to accept the rational expectations paradigm is telling. By intentionally clouding the debate with the dense technical noise of banking frictions, corporate leverage ratios, and debt distress, he orchestrates an intellectual smokescreen. This elaborate obfuscation is designed to camouflage a thoroughly hollow pseudoscientific thesis, one that surreptitiously substitutes the rigorous concept of structural stagflation with the trendy nomenclature of balance sheet distress. The motive behind this strategic blindness to causality is transparent. It is a desperate evasion of the Lucas critique. Under the laws of rational expectations, when the public observes the state stepping forward as the borrower of last resort and accumulating staggering sovereign deficits, they do not react as passive laboratory subjects. Instead, forward-looking agents immediately internalize the state's fiscal profligacy, anticipating the inevitable onset of crushing future tax liabilities and inflation-driven currency devaluation, a textbook manifestation of Ricardian equivalence. Consequently, instead of spending, rational actors further entrench themselves, neutralizing the state's intervention through aggressive private retrenchment. This is the definition of endogenous policy failure. To peddle his hyper-Keynesian panacea, which forcefully props up terminal asset bubbles and violently distorts the price discovery mechanism of capital, Cou is forced to strip market participants of their foresight. His entire economic illusion depends on a grotesque reduction of human dignity. He must treat sophisticated economic agents as infantile toddlers in a macroeconomic kindergarten, capable only of a naive, short-sighted preference for immediate confectionery. To be fair, the Chicago School's near-religious focus on static equilibrium of the price mechanism and automatic market clearing left a theoretical flank wide open, one that Koo, a hyper-Keynesian outlier, deftly exploited. Rejecting the notion of self-correcting equilibrium, Koo insisted that the state must step forward as the borrower of last resort. By running staggering fiscal deficits, the sovereign hand forcefully bridges the spending vacuum left by a retreating private sector. The state artificially anchors the macro aggregate, buying precious time for traumatized balance sheets to heal until the economy can theoretically climb back onto a normal trajectory of balanced growth. Yet in out-Keynesing Keynes himself, Koo has fulfilled a covertly statist mission on the back of a jerry-built paradigm. His strategy of forcing equilibrium by structural coercion has mutated into a catastrophic legacy, not merely the architect of Japan's lost 3 decades, but a red poison pill that threatens its very future. Whether Koo remains blind to the real-world wreckage of his thesis, is actively hostile to the objective laws of human agency, or deliberately sows the seeds of state capitalism remains a dark ambiguity. He is either a theorist permanently incapable of grasping the profound logic of economics, or a blind man dancing recklessly on the edge of a cliff. Economics is intrinsically dynamic. The market is a spontaneous process of continuous evolution, not a sterile, closed arena. It can never achieve perfect static equilibrium, for it is precisely within disequilibrium that future wealth resides. As Joseph Schumpeter famously argued, entrepreneurs drive economic progress through a relentless gale of creative destruction that shatters existing equilibria. When a society is gripped by a pervasive loss of confidence, the root cause invariably lies in institutional suffocation, state-led economic control, and a dogmatic obsession with forced stability that transform a vibrant marketplace into a wasteland of despair. The Japanese economy, in its structural reality, is an artifact of this stagnation, a feudal topography of the Edo period mutated into a modern corporate counterpart, Daimyo Capitalism. Legitimized by the post-World War II geopolitical realignments in East Asia and sustained by American intervention, Japan's heavily subsidized economic miracle became path-dependent on external stimuli and continuous state intervention. The nation experienced a post-war takeoff, but failed to achieve a genuine institutional rebirth. The pre-war system of family-controlled zaibatsu, the Big Four, Mitsui, Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, and Yasuda. Then, zaibatsu merely reassumed control under a post-war guise, the Keiretsu system, dominated by 6 mega-conglomerates, Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo, Fuyo, Sanwa, and DKB. During the apex of the late 20th century Japanese miracle, these 6 Keiretsu corporate networks, woven together through intricate cross-shareholding, directly or indirectly monopolized nearly half of the country's corporate asset base. This collusive state capitalism, where capital and political power copulate, has systematically paralyzed societal creativity. When reinforced by deeply entrenched cultural hierarchies and rigid conservatism, it effectively smothers the innovative impulses of grassroots civil society and small enterprises. It is into this heavily rigged game that Richard Koo introduces his fiscal policy. In a corporate state, aggressive government borrowing inevitably triggers a predatory Cantillon effect. The state-injected capital is monopolized by the oligarchic conglomerates closest to the spigot of power. Small and medium enterprises are pushed further out of the credit market, rendering them impotent against the corporate behemoths and aggravating the relative poverty of ordinary citizens. Koo's red macroeconomics is, in truth, a demonic paradigm. It plunders the taxpayer to subsidize the incumbent corporate aristocracy, asphyxiating the entrepreneurial vitality of civil society and draining the lifeblood of Japan's future. In recent years, Richard Koo has aggressively inserted himself into Beijing's macroeconomic corridors, engineering high-profile media blitzes across mainstream Chinese financial outlets like China Business Network and Guanxia. Yet, even as he hawked his paradigm, Koo offered a more ominous caveat. China's predicament is vastly more convoluted than Japan's. Tokyo's late 20th century crisis was a clinical asset bubble isolated within a hyper-efficient manufacturing matrix that still exported automobiles and cameras with ruthless precision. China, by contrast, faces a compound trauma. Its balance sheet fragility is synchronized with a structural hard landing of its massive real estate and infrastructure complex, alongside a premature demographic trap, the sobering reality of getting old before getting rich. Despite this harrowing diagnosis, Koo's reflexive therapy remains unchanged. He repeatedly implores Beijing to unleash its state balance sheet at maximum speed to substitute private demand. This predatory blueprint, which critics charge as plundering future tax revenues to prolong an unsustainable investment model, has proved so egregious that it provoked a fierce backlash from an unlikely ideological counterweight, Justin Yifu Lin. Lin, the founder of New Structural Economics, whose own life is defined by a legendary dramatic crossing of the Taiwan Strait in 1979, found himself compelled to step into the academic arena. Rejecting Koo's defeatist diagnosis, Lin systematically dismantled the balance sheet recession orthodoxy. Armed with the tenets of structural economics, Lin argued that as a developing economy, China still possesses immense technological headroom and productivity premiums, realities that render Koo's prescription not a salvation, but a misdiagnosed policy trap designed to institutionalize stagnation. From Justin Yifu Lin's vantage point, Koo's celebrated diagnosis systematically mistakes the symptom for the etiology. The refusal of corporations and households to spend is driven not by the historical dead weight of high leverage, but by a profound scarcity of high-yield investment horizons. Lin posits a foundational microeconomic reality. If a firm identifies a disruptive technology or a high-growth sector capable of generating substantial returns on invested capital, it will aggressively pursue expansion regardless of its legacy debt liabilities. Under such conditions, financial intermediaries remain eager to extend credit, as endogenous growth and future profitability provide the most efficient mechanism to dilute asset-side distress. Japan's lost decades, in Lin's analysis, were precipitated not by a psychological behavioral shift toward debt minimization, but by Tokyo's post-1980s capitulation on proactive industrial policies that could foster pioneering tech sectors, leaving the state devoid of new economic catalysts. Therefore, the antidote for Beijing's current structural headwinds is not a blind embrace of Koo's demand-side placebo, which relies on unproductive, sovereign-funded aggregate procurement to paper over the cracks. Instead, it demands the strategic deployment of what Lin's New Structural Economics champions: the synergy of an efficient market and an enabling state. The state must catalyze technological innovation and structural upgrades, constantly forging frontiers and deploying growth as the ultimate solvent for structural friction. The ultimate irony is structural. Lin's New Structural Economics paradigm is explicitly designed around state-led industrial policy and active counter-cyclical adjustments. Yet, when an economist so deeply committed to the concept of an enabling state finds Koo's borrower of last resort doctrine utterly unendurable and analytically bankrupt, the true nature of Koo's framework is laid bare. It ceases to be an economic theory. It stands exposed as a predatory, distortive paradigm, an intellectual trap designed to institutionalize state dependency and choke off the organic vitality of the market. Having structurally paralyzed Japan, This toxic doctrine now aggressively contours its path into China, with its evangelical gaze undeniably set on the macroeconomic fault lines of Europe and the West. This intellectual revolution, exported from Taiwan's elite dynasties, is fast becoming a global wildfire. Yet in the final calculus, Ku's red macroeconomics remains a relatively legible pathology. Its underlying malice is readily identifiable. It is a theory in a frantic, unseemly rush to march civil society into the iron cage of a command economy. Stripped of its benign veneer, Ku's framework merely weaponizes the traditional Keynesian concept of an active government to construct an authoritarian leviathan, a state dirigisme whose sole purpose is to cartelize wealth and subsidize an incumbent corporate aristocracy at the expense of the taxpayer. However, a far more insidious intellectual trap awaits. Justin Yifu Lin's New Structural Economics, with its elegantly calibrated equilibrium of an enabling state guiding a finite market, presents a diagnostic challenge infinitely more deceptive than Ku's blunt force poison pill. And so, we are brought to the ultimate ideological crossroads of our century. Shall we rely on the coercive machinery of a command economy to mandate and engineer the next industrial revolution? Or shall we trust in the spontaneous order of a truly liberated market, a sanctuary meticulously safeguarded by the state, where millions of individual participants deploy their unique, dispersed knowledge and subjective agency to organically forge the future? We leave this existential query to you, dear reader, for it is precisely at this conceptual precipice where Ku's blatant tyranny ends, and the much deeper, more labyrinthine illusions of Lin's New Structural Economics begin. We shall enter that ideological labyrinth in our next chapter.
My joy, grief.